Ooh, that is bitter. Hello and welcome back to Art Theories. This week we're going to be talking about the White Pube's new book, Poor Artists. The White Pube is the collective identity of two art critics, Gabrielle de la Puente and Zarina Mohammed. Ooh, that's still sour. Still taste that. I fell in love with the White Pube's writing back in 2018. I had just stormed out of an unpaid internship at the Victoria Miro Gallery, and I was working in the cafe and restaurant of the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. I was starting to notice that the art world was very hierarchical, very elitist, and very uninspiring. And it was around that time that I discovered a text from the White Pube called I Literally Hate the Art World. And from then on, the White Pube became my people out there fighting the good fight. With all that being said, it's actually kind of difficult for me to review this book because it's kind of like asking a Swiftie to review the latest Taylor Swift album. But I'll try my best. So let's start with what the book's about. The book follows the life of Quest Talukdar, who from a very young age feels very connected to art and creativity. Quest only really wants one thing. Quest wants to be an artist. Quest wants to make art. Quest wants to spend her life pursuing art and creativity. And so naturally, Quest decides to go to art school, and then Quest enters the art world. The thing is, the art world is a strange and dangerous place. And in the pursuit of a creatively fulfilling career, Quest needs to learn how to navigate this strange and terrifying world. Now you might be wondering, why is this guy dressed as a lemon? Well, good observation. Let me explain. Early on in the book, we meet Quest as a baby, and baby Quest is taken to a lot of art galleries by her mum. Quest absolutely adores these gallery trips, but she doesn't quite understand what's going on in these weird rooms full of objects that the adults are calling art galleries. One day, Quest and Quest's mum, and Quest's auntie I think, are sat in a gallery cafe, and as a joke, the adults decide to give Quest a slice of lemon to try. Quest puts the lemon in her mouth and immediately thinks she's been poisoned. She spits the lemon out. Disgusting. But then Quest is like, hang on a second, do I hate this taste? Maybe I like this taste. So Quest puts the lemon back in her mouth, tries it one more time, before deciding she does actually hate the taste of lemon. Baby Quest goes on to compare the experience of trying a lemon to the experience of entering an art gallery. You walk into the room and you wait to see how your body reacts to the art. What feelings come up? What do you think? What do you feel when you encounter the artwork? You might have to try the artwork a few times before you know for sure whether you like it or hate it. The lemon scene is only a small scene at the beginning of the book, but I wonder whether the lemon analogy plays a bigger role within the narrative. Maybe the art world itself is a lemon. So many of us leave art school and go on to have to try the lemon that is the art world. And so many of us spit that lemon out. I can tell you from first-hand experience that the art world is an incredibly bitter lemon, and I did spit it out. So I want to start by just talking through a couple of themes or kind of things I noticed about the book as I was reading it. And thing number one that I picked up on whilst reading the book was that it is fiction rather than non-fiction. Normally, art theory is a very dry genre, normally written in the essay format, using a lot of big, complicated, unnecessary language. Poor Artists is anything but that. Poor Artists is fiction, it's a story, it's very gripping, it's very fun. And I really enjoyed that. And the White Pube found a way of weaving all of the information that could have been written in a non-fiction essay format into the story by creating weird characters and mad situations. And I think that worked really well. It felt like a risk, but it felt like a risk that paid off. Thing number two that I noticed when reading the book is that it's really funny. This book is surprisingly funny, and I mean, the White Pube's writing's always been funny, but I feel like they really turned it up a level in Poor Artists. And to me, this also made a lot of sense because The art world is a very pretentious place. It's a place that takes itself a bit too seriously. And a great way of disarming that pretentiousness is with humour. And I think that was really successfully employed within the book. The third thing I noticed is that the book uses quite a lot of surrealism. I don't know if you can read this, by the way. I'm sorry if you can't. The book uses a lot of surrealism. The way I see it, Poor Artists is quite similar to stories like Alice in Wonderland or Spirited Away, in the sense that someone from a normal world has accidentally stumbled into this weird, dangerous, surreal world, and they need to learn to navigate this weird, surreal world in order to make their way back to the normal world. And the deeper the quest goes into the art world, the more surreal and the more sinister things start to become. And the final thing I noticed, before moving on, is that the book is very accessible. And what I mean by that is that you could read this book with no prior knowledge of art or art history. I think the White Pube, well, I know the White Pube definitely did that intentionally. And it's really nice and it's really refreshing to see that, because that's not something that a lot of art books do. I think something they did which made that work really well is Quest kind of feels like an outsider. She feels like she stumbled in on this world that she doesn't quite belong to. And that means that you're exploring the art world with Quest. The two of you are kind of going on this weird safari, and you're both kind of looking at the weirdness together. And that creates quite a welcoming and inclusive vibe. So that's another thing that I noticed about the book. So this is kind of a bizarre book, and I don't know very many art theory books quite like it. So it left me asking the question, like, what inspired this book? What books led to this book? And I have two theories. My first theory, they're both hunches to be honest. My first hunch is that the writings of Chris Kraus influenced the White Pube in writing Poor Artists. Now, I've only ever attempted to read one Chris Kraus book, and I never finished it. So I can't really say with very much certainty whether or not Chris Kraus did influence the White Pube. However, there is a passage in this book which says, "You've lent each other Chris Kraus books, not knowing if they were novels or something between fiction and non-fiction." And Poor Artists is a novel that lies somewhere between fiction and non-fiction. So that kind of felt like a clue. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that there is some sort of relationship between those two books. Okay, now it's time for my hot take. This book is strange. It's a really strange book, and I was trying to understand, like, how did this book come into existence? What are the things that inspired this book? And I have my Chris Kraus theory, but that's kind of weak. I was looking for something more. And something about the name Quest. The name Quest felt like a clue. It felt like it's not a normal name, it's a name with a lot of connotations. I was like, this name Quest, I was focusing on that. And for some reason in my head, I had just kind of assumed that it was Gabrielle's idea to call the main character Quest. And I was like, why? Why have I made this assumption? Like, why do I think that? And then I remembered that last year, at some point, Gabrielle put out a YouTube video which was called Gallery Quest. And I actually enjoyed that video, so I was like, great, here's my lead. I went back and I watched the Gallery Quest video, looking for clues, looking for some sort of hints on what the word quest means to the White Pube. And at first, I couldn't find anything. But then, I hit the jackpot. There's a short clip in the Gallery Quest video where Gabrielle's in a cafe and she's drinking a matcha latte. And for just like a few seconds, she shows us what book she's reading. And she just so happened to be reading Into the Woods by John Yorke. Into the Woods is a video all about stories and how they're told, and I found Into the Woods really helpful in developing that storytelling technique for my content. So obviously I was super excited when I saw that Gabrielle's reading that book too. Okay, so what is Into the Woods about? Into the Woods is a book about stories. It explains how stories are told, how they're structured, and how that structure reflects the human mind. In this book, John York talks about a specific style of storytelling called a Holy Grail quest. The vast majority of stories in the West are Holy Grail quests. It's everything from Finding Nemo to Lord of the Rings. And I would argue that Poor Artists is another example of a Holy Grail quest. I'm going to explain the structure of a Holy Grail quest using Finding Nemo as an example. Holy Grail quests start with a hero. In Finding Nemo, our hero is Marlin. Now, our hero has to want something, and Marlin, he wants something. He wants Nemo. So Nemo is the Holy Grail in Finding Nemo. He's the thing that the hero wants the most. But Marlin also has a flaw. Marlin's flaw is that he's terrified of the ocean. In order to get his Holy Grail, which is Nemo, Marlin has to overcome his fear of the ocean. Holy Grail quests also contain the woods. The hero has to go into the woods in order to get their Holy Grail. Now, this doesn't have to be a literal woods. The woods is the scary, dangerous, and weird place the hero has to go to in order to get their Holy Grail. So in the case of Finding Nemo, the woods is the deep ocean. I'm going to read you a short quote. It's by Hilary Mantel, and it's all about the role of the woods in fairy tales. What happens to us in the depths of the wood? Civilization and its discontents gives way to the irrational and the half-seen. Back in the village, we are neurotic, but the woods releases our full-blown madness. Okay, so let's apply the Holy Grail formula to Poor Artists and let's see what happens. Well, hero. We have a hero. Her name is Quest. And Quest has a Holy Grail. Quest's Holy Grail, she wants creative fulfillment. It's not a physical Holy Grail like in Finding Nemo where the Holy Grail is Nemo. It's a metaphorical Holy Grail. But Quest wants creative fulfillment just as much as Marlin wants Nemo. We also have the woods. The woods in Poor Artists is the art world. It's when Quest enters the art world that things start to get weird and scary. Let me read you that Hilary Mantel quote again, but this time I'm going to replace the word woods with the word art world. What happens to us in the depths of the art world? Civilization and its discontents gives way to the irrational and the half-seen. Back in the village, we are neurotic, but the art world releases our full-blown madness. Okay, so we have a hero, we have a Holy Grail, and we have the woods. But this begs the question, what are Quest's flaws? And this is where it gets interesting, because Quest's flaws aren't real flaws, but they are things that stop her from thriving in the art world. In my opinion, Quest has two flaws. The first flaw is a lack of knowledge. Quest doesn't understand the art world at the beginning of the book. She doesn't speak its language fluently and she doesn't understand all the references. Quest spends the first half of the book overcoming this flaw. She exposes herself to the art world, she goes to art school, and she learns all of this information. So by the midpoint of the book, Quest has overcome flaw number one. But it's flaw number two that I think is even more interesting. Sorry for my terrible handwriting. In my opinion, Quest's other flaw is that she's too honest and she's too sincere. And these are qualities that stop her from thriving in the art world and means that she can't reach her Holy Grail. Now there's a really important midway point in the book.
where Quest becomes a bit more comfortable telling lies. She kind of disconnects from her creativity in a certain way, and she starts making art that she doesn't really care about. It's superficial art. She starts focusing more on commercial success and less on the joys of being creative. And this is a really important turning point in the book, because when she makes those changes to her personality, she overcomes her second flaw, and all of a sudden she starts making a bit more progress in the art world. I think this is a really important turning point to include in the book because, well, speaking from personal experience, as someone who did do low-level gallery work jobs whilst trying to make it as an artist, something I noticed about myself is that I became a much worse person during that period of my life. I became more superficial and more disconnected from my creativity. I think that's a real thing, and I think it's something that a lot of people go through. And so it's really cool to see that reflected in the book, because I genuinely think the art world turns us into worse versions of ourselves. That being said, there are a lot of really cool people in the art world who haven't compromised their values, and I'm not trying to throw shade at them. As soon as Quest overcomes her flaw of being too honest and too sincere, she starts to make a bit more progress in the art world. And I think this is a really important point to note, because she changes fundamentally from being a hero to being an anti-hero.
What is an anti-hero, I hear you say? An anti-hero is a central character in a story who doesn't have the traditional characteristics of a hero. Anti-heroes are often complex characters with a history of bad decisions and a questionable moral code, but they may still have good intentions.
So I know I'm like a major White Pube fangirl, and I'm literally here dressed as a lemon, so I was always going to like the book. But oh my goodness, I've never sworn on Art Theories before, but I fucking loved this book. And this isn't just my opinion, it's objectively a really good book and a really good story. Like, there is one of the big tests with art theory books is, are there filler pages? Are there pages in the book that don't really need to be there? And Poor Artists doesn't have any filler pages. Every page, every chapter is so essential, so relevant, so packed with insight and meaning and humour. And honestly, I just flew through it. I enjoyed it so much. I kind of binged it. Like, I think I'm going to read it again, but slower. But what's so beautiful about Poor Artists is that this is the book that we all needed when we went to art school. A book that, in simple, like, plain, understandable English, fully acknowledges that the art world is a rigged game and is a really miserable place, but at the same time acknowledges that we're all still going to go out there and chase our dreams. I'm really glad that this book exists for future art students. Can you imagine how good it would have been to read this book before starting art school? I spent a lot of my 20s lost in the woods, by which I mean trying to navigate the art world and figuring out my place within it. And I think that the 2018 version of me, the one who was working unpaid for the Victoria Miro Gallery, would have found a lot of comfort and a lot of guidance from this book had he been able to read it back then. And I'm really glad it exists. I'm really glad it's out there now for the next generation of poor souls, poor artists, who have to enjoy the art world. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.